Hey guys, if you've ever used DynamoDB, you'd realize really quickly that they have a bunch of methods to read and create multiple items at once in DynamoDB. But let's say you wanted to update multiple items at once in DynamoDB, then there is no really convenient way to do that. So in this video, let's see how we can use a couple of methods in DynamoDB, especially scan and transact write items. We'll be using those methods to achieve our objective. So let's get started. I have a folder here set up already. So in this, as you can see, I have an index.js file, and I also have package.json and .env. So in the package.json file, please go ahead and install AWS SDK and .env. And also in the .env file, you have to add your AWS access key, secret key, and region. And once you have this set up in index.js, I already have some code here. So what I've done is I've imported AWS, I've imported .env, and I've configured that. And I also have set up my credentials here, AWS credentials. So now let's get started. We'll get started by adding this DynamoDB object here. So what we'll do is a new AWS DynamoDB, and we'll pass it the API version, that is 2012, 08 and 10. So now our main function is batch update items, where we'll be implementing the logic. So I would first like to begin by adding a try catch block. So it should be, and then when I say console.error, then in my try catch block, the first thing that I would like to do is to call DynamoDB a scan method, because I want to get all my items from my table that I've already set up in my AWS account. So I've named my table to do, straightforward. So then if you read the documentation for DynamoDB scan method, you would notice that it accepts or expects params as the first object and a callback function. So let's start by defining the params object. So I want to name that scan params, and inside I want to say expression attribute. If you guys don't know what this means, you can look up the documentation, but I'll do my best to explain. So basically what we are doing here by defining expression attribute names is we are adding substitutions for our attributes in the table, because DynamoDB has a bunch of reserved keywords, and we'll be using an attribute that is actually a reserved keyword. So we want to substitute those. So here status is the one that is a reserved keyword in DynamoDB. So what we'll do is we want to say est corresponds to status. Then we want to add another field. It's called projection expression, and that should be id and st. Basically I'm saying I'm asking rather DynamoDB to narrow down the attributes that it returns. So then I want to say table name. The table name is basically to do, right? So now that we have this, let's call the DynamoDB scan method, and what we'll say is DynamoDB.scan, and then we'll pass in the params, and then we will define our callback function. So inside, before we do that, I always like to wrap my DynamoDB calls inside a promise, so that it is easier to work with. So what I'll do is I'll say const response equal to await. I want to say new promise. I want to say resolve reject. Inside here I want to return DynamoDB scan. Okay, let's add the return there, and we'll be like if error we reject the error, and if else we'll say pass in the data. So now we have this response. Inside the response object there is items array, so which we will get like this. And now let's console log this, make sure it's all working. Let's say to-dos, and now if we run node index.js, yes, you can see that I'm getting this to-dos items from my DynamoDB table. So what but I'm not a fan of this data structure, right? It's nested, it's a bit ugly to look at. So what I like to do is like to sanitize this, basically convert it into a format that is easier for us to work with. So I want to say to-dos.map. I want to say, okay, I want to create an object, return an object rather. I want to say rid.s, then we'll be like status or status.s. So now if we console log this one, okay, let's copy that. Okay, so let's, okay, that should be sanitized. Okay, what am I getting wrong? Cool. Okay, cool. So now if we run this, sure enough, we have an object that is easier to read. So now that we are done with the scan method, we have all the items that we need to update at once. So the next method I'll be using is DynamoDB's transact write items method. So again, this transact write items method expects a params object similar to scan. So I want to construct that. So it is that we'll start by defining our transact write params object, where it expects an array, basically transact items array. Initially we'll say it is empty. Then what I like to do is I like to call DynamoDB dot transact write items, and then pass in the transact write params. I want to do promise. So basically, if we set up everything correctly, then this will update all our items at once. So what we do is we'll first construct this transact items array, because we cannot be passing an empty array there. So what I'll do is I'll first define a transact items array equals to an empty object. Then what I'd like to do is I'd like to add a for loop and loop through each of these to-dos, and for each of them I want to construct an object, and this object goes inside this transact items property. So here what I would like to do is I would like to say, okay, we'll spread all the transact items, then we will add our update property. If you guys don't know what this means, you can look up the docs. So this is the format that transact write items expects. So what we want to do here is I want to add our expression attribute names, which I've already talked about earlier. So we'll say at, Okay, status, I want to substitute status with st, and then I want to add something called expression attribute values. Again, similar to expression attribute names, this lets us reuse uh, this value, expression attribute value, throughout this object in different expressions. So as you can see, I have status active for all of these to dos. I want to make them inactive. So I'll define a variable and I'll say yes and inactive. So then I want to say update expression. I want to say set. I want to take my status and equal to inactive. So basically we're telling DynamoDB to update the status for all these items from active to inactive using the update expression. I also want to pass the table name and also add in the key, which is the primary key for the to-dos table, which should be the ID. So I want to say get the ID from todo.id. So now we have everything we need. All we have to do is pass this transact items to the transact items property in the params object. So now if we run this code, let's run this code and see what happens. Okay, there seems to be an error here. Okay, there should be a comma. Cool. Let's run this one. Cool. So of course we are not returning anything. So what I'd like to do is I want to comment this out for a second so we can scan and see what the newly updated to-dos look like. So if you now do that, tada, you have it. Here you can see that the status has been updated from active to inactive. So this is how you can use transact write items and the scan method to update multiple items at once in DynamoDB. But if you notice, we have a lot of opportunities here to refactor this code. So I want to do a couple of things. First, I want to move the scan related logic into its own function, and also this constructing this transact items logic into another function, and then a third function to call transact write items method. So I want to first start by defining get all to dos function, which is an asynchronous function. So I want to pass in the table name and I want to add a try catch block as usual. Okay, come on, try catch, and we will log the error as well. Okay, that should do it. So then what I'd like to do is I'd like to copy all this and move it over to get all to-dos. So now we'll return the to-dos, and also if there is an error we return an empty array. Okay, we'll return an empty array then. Cool. So what I like to do next is we will get the to-dos by calling this function await get all to-dos, and we'll pass in the table name. So this should give us the to-dos. And then what I'd like to do next is add our construct transact items function. So let's do that. Construct transact items. This one accepts two params, which is items and then table name. Then what I like to do is I like to move all this logic that we've defined here to this function. So let's cut that, let's copy it here. So cool. Okay, there are a few things we need to change. First one, this would be items, right? So okay, let's make it a bit general. Item, we'll say item. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll return this transact items. So now we have this function that constructs the transact items property. So what we'll do is we'll call this so we can get our array. So what I want to do is transact items equal to construct transact items. I want to pass items. I want to set sanitize to do, and I also want to pass table name. So we now have our transact items. So the final function we need is the handle transact right. So we'll define that. We'll say handle transact right. So that is again an asynchronous function which accepts transact right items, and basically we move this code there inside. So I want to start by copying this here. Okay, so we'll make it a bit generic, say params here. Then what I'll do is I'll add a try catch block. Console log the error as well. And then all I have to do is call this method inside the try block. Cool. So the final thing that we have to do is to call this handle transact right and pass in the transact right items. Cool. So what is it? Transact items. Cool. This should be, yeah, we'll modify this to params. Cool. So now we have everything we need. So what we can do is we can run this function. As you were aware of, the status is now inactive. So just to test this out, we'll just make it active here, and if we run this, cool. Again, I want to comment this part out, see if the updates actually worked. See, as you can see, the status has been updated to active. So yeah, basically you can use both these scan and transact right items methods to update multiple items at once. Of course, there are a lot more things to be done here, like scan method, paginates results, and then transact right items. API has a limit of 100 operations per call. So we'll handle all of those in the next video. So thank you guys. See you again. Bye.